There's something silent, almost invisible, that accompanies many people throughout life: the fear of failure. It hides in the simplest gestures, in the choices we fail to make, in the words we dare not say. It shapes identities, as if it were an ever-present shadow, dictating what we can and cannot accomplish. From an early age, we learn that making mistakes is shameful, that failure is proof of incapacity. Thus, we grow up carrying this cultural wound that paralyzes us, a mark that doesn't bleed on the outside, but consumes us on the inside. Carl Jung said that everything we avoid looking at becomes a shadow, and within that shadow live the parts of ourselves we reject. Failure is one of them. We don't want to acknowledge it, we don't want to feel it, but by running away from it, we also run away from the riches it holds. Because at the heart of what we call error, there are seeds of consciousness, fragments of wisdom that can only be accessed when we stop fighting against failure. The shadow, however threatening it may seem, holds the gold of our transformation. Joseph Campbell, speaking of the hero's journey, recalled that in every true story there is a moment of fall, of rupture, of inevitable pain. It is not the end of the road, but the beginning of initiation. The hero always encounters the dark cave, where he believes he will find death, but therein lies hidden treasure. Failure, in real life, fulfills exactly this role. It is at the moment we believe we have lost everything that something deeper can be born. The fall is not the end, but the portal. Deep down, those who come here seeking answers do not simply desire success, recognition, or external achievements. The hidden desire is something else: to find peace. The peace of not being enslaved by the fear of failure. The freedom of not living constantly under the tyranny of perfection. The true longing is to breathe without the constant weight of pressure, to be able to live authentically, without having to hide behind masks that feign security. This is why talking about failure is so necessary. Because, above all, it is talking about life. It is talking about courage, about truth, about humanity. Throughout this video, we'll walk this sensitive terrain together, revealing how the fear of failure imprisons, but also how it can become the key that unlocks the deepest doors of the soul. And perhaps, at the end of this journey, you'll discover that it's not failure that should be feared, but the absence of life that arises when we begin to run from it. If this message has resonated with you so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This way, you'll strengthen this space and help this reflection reach even more people. The fear of failure isn't limited to the mind, it settles in the body silently, almost imperceptibly, yet profoundly powerful. Every heartbeat seems charged with tension, every muscle contracts without us even realizing it. The amygdala, the guardian of danger, reacts as if our lives were in danger, even when there is no real threat. And this is how fear becomes a prison. It activates ancient reflexes, plunging the body and mind into a state of constant alert, draining energy, stifling creativity, and freezing action. In modern cultures, failure is feared more than death itself. We are taught to measure our worth by achievements, recognition, and performance. Every mistake is internalized as judgment, as proof of inadequacy, and vital energy recedes, also reducing our ability to manifest real change in life. Every missed opportunity, every hesitation, is a reflection of this invisible tension that holds us back, preventing us from moving forward. Even when we make conscious decisions, this silent energetic prison continues to operate behind the scenes, shaping our choices subtly, almost imperceptibly. It's as if an invisible force pulls back every step we take. And, paradoxically, the more we try to control, the more we strive to avoid failure, the more we realize we're immersed in this web of fear. It's in this space between desire and blockage, between action and stagnation, that life calls us to look. Because recognizing this invisible prison isn't about blaming ourselves, but about observing ourselves clearly and gently. It's about feeling every reaction of the body, every contraction of the mind, and realizing that within this tension lies a door. A door that, when crossed, reveals that the energy of fear can be transformed into movement, into learning, into momentum toward the true manifestation of life. Failure ceases to be a threat when we stop treating it as an enemy and begin to see it as a messenger. It shows us where we're blocked, where our energy hides, where our potential lies dormant. And in this silent but profound recognition, liberation begins. Fear doesn't disappear immediately, but it ceases to be a prison. It becomes a marker, a map of what needs to be integrated, faced, and transformed. Many people carry failure as if it were a permanent seal on their identity, as if each mistake defined who they truly are. Jung reminds us that projecting failure onto identity is an unconscious movement that blocks action and imprisons the soul. It's not just that something went wrong, the mistake becomes part of the I we believe ourselves to be. And it is in this space that life begins to contract, because the fear of failure becomes the fear of fully existing. The difference between I failed at something and I am a failure seems subtle, but it is profound. The first phrase acknowledges experience and allows for learning. The second creates a fixed narrative that stifles growth. When we internalize failure as an identity, we stop experimenting, we stop trying, and life shrinks into illusory safety zones. Every rejected opportunity, every step we fail to take, is a manifestation of this silent confusion between action and identity. This invisible deception fuels cycles of self-sabotage. The mind tries to protect itself, but the result is stagnation. Every thought, every choice, is filtered by the fear that another mistake will confirm the narrative of I am insufficient. And so, without realizing it, we transform failure into an emotional prison, an energetic limitation. Life invites us to look at this shadow, to realize that we are more than our mistakes, and that true identity is not written in failures, but in the ability to overcome them, to integrate the experience, and move forward consciously. Confusing failure with identity keeps the individual trapped in a vibrational frequency of fear, of silent self-punishment, and prevents the manifestation of true potential. Freedom begins when this distinction becomes clear, when failure ceases to be a sentence and becomes a guide, a map of growth, a bridge to the inner transformation that has always been waiting to be traversed. At the heart of failure lies an invisible opportunity, a raw material that, when understood, can transform into gold. The alchemist archetype teaches us that nigredo, darkness, is not the end, but the beginning of transformation. Jung saw this process as a chance to integrate the shadow, to look at the rejected parts of ourselves and extract from them profound knowledge. Every mistake, every fall, contains subtle information about our patterns, limitations, and hidden potential. Great discoveries have often been born from failure. Scientists, artists, spiritual leaders all have had moments when all seemed lost, moments when failure seemed definitive. But it is precisely in these moments that life offers the opportunity to learn deeply, to access invisible layers of consciousness that would never be reached without confronting failure. Failure, thus, becomes a laboratory of the soul, a sacred space where transformation occurs silently but irreversibly. Rewriting a memory of failure is like taking a lump of coal and turning it into a diamond. Perception shifts, meaning expands, and what once seemed like loss reveals itself as a path to growth. It's not about ignoring pain, but about understanding it, recognizing it as part of the process of evolution. Gold doesn't emerge from the absence of mistakes, but from the ability to navigate them with attention, awareness, and courage. When failure is viewed this way, the energy shifts. Fear ceases to be a blockage and becomes a marker. Failure becomes a sign that something profound is being activated, that life is making room for something greater. And thus, alchemy is realized. What seemed like disintegration transforms into synthesis, into vital force, into a bridge to fulfillment that doesn't depend on perfection, but on conscious presence and integration. There's a silent paradox in life. The more we try to avoid failure, the further we move away from what we truly desire. Hypervigilance creates constant tension, an unconscious effort to control every outcome, every step, every decision. But excessive control doesn't create security, it creates rigidity, blocks the flow of life, and increases anxiety. The mind and body go on permanent alert, and the fear of failure becomes a nearly insurmountable barrier. Neuroscience shows that excess dopamine, coupled with the desire to avoid mistakes and strive for perfect results, can block emotional coherence and reduce decision-making ability. Anxiety emerges as a silent sabotage, distorting perception and keeping the person trapped in repetitive cycles of hesitation. The more one tries to avoid failure, the more intense the resistance becomes, as if the fear itself became an obstacle to the manifestation of real change. It is at this point that understanding becomes liberating. Recognizing that the fear of failure is natural and that it will always exist doesn't mean resignation, it means clarity. It means realizing that failure is not an enemy, but an indicator of movement. Every attempt, every stumble, every insecurity carries with it precious information about limits, unconscious patterns, and vital energy. When we understand this, fear ceases to be a prison and becomes a guide, showing exactly where we need to act, integrate, and expand. Life unfolds in this delicate balance between intention and commitment, between care and courage. Avoiding failure at all costs is distancing ourselves from the experience itself. Accepting that it is part of the process is opening space for true freedom, the kind that allows us to walk with confidence, even in the face of the unknown, even when faced with the possibility of falling, knowing that each fall carries within it the impulse to rise stronger and more conscious. Failure, though fraught with pain and discomfort, reveals something essential. It indicates that we are alive, that we are moving, that we are experiencing. Each failure activates mirror neurons in our minds, expanding our capacity to learn and adapt. The body and mind record each experience as memory, as valuable information that shapes future choices. To fail is not to retreat, it is to advance deeply, even if invisible to the outside world. Nature offers us clear examples of this truth. Trees that brave strong winds develop deeper roots. Mountains that endure storms shape rivers that flow with force. Thus, each failure, each obstacle, carries the function of strengthening the inner structure, of expanding the terrain where life manifests. It is not stagnation that failure reveals, but movement, adaptation, and preparation for something greater. When we understand failure as a sign of life, our perception changes. It ceases to be punishment or proof of incapacity and becomes an indicator of presence. Each stumble becomes a message that we are engaged in the journey of existence, connected to the reality that growing involves risk, vulnerability, and exposure. And it is in this silent and profound recognition that life finds space to reveal itself in its fullness, showing that failure does not diminish us, but strengthens us, making visible the intensity of our being alive. The fear of failure emits silent waves that spread through every thought, every sensation, every gesture. It is a frequency that resonates in the body and mind, creating unconscious resistance, blocking energy, and stifling the genuine expression of being. Every hesitation, every doubt, is amplified by this vibration, making it more difficult to access the clarity, creativity, and courage needed to move forward. In contrast, there is the frequency of surrender, a lighter, more open attunement that allows for the integration of experience without resistance. Breathing consciously, allowing the imagination to flow, and internally symbolizing the process of life are ways to reconnect these frequencies. By making space for surrender, the mind stops fighting fear, and the body stops tensing. Surrender does not mean passivity, but active presence, clear attention, and awareness of what arises in the moment. Viewing failure not as a threat, but as part of the flow, transforms perception. Failure ceases to be synonymous with disaster and becomes part of the natural movement of life, a bridge that connects learning, experience, and expansion. When we recognize the vibration of fear and balance it with the frequency of surrender, something profound happens. Fear ceases to dominate, and dormant potential finds space to manifest. Each step becomes firmer, each decision more aligned with our essence, and life begins to flow in tune with who we truly are, without masks, without pressure, simply with presence. There are times when the mind seeks to protect itself with words and images of optimism, trying to stifle the discomfort of failure. But positivity without integrating the shadow creates dissonance. Pretending everything is fine, when inside there is pain, hesitation, and fear, only pushes down what needs to be felt and understood. Marie-Louise von Franz reminds us of the importance of dialoguing with dark symbols, of looking at what we avoid, because it is in this confrontation that true transformation lies. When we ignore the shadow, we try to replace real experience with ideal images, creating a misaligned vibrational frequency. The mind remains restless, the body still harbors tension, and the feeling of failure intensifies because it has not been integrated. Thoughts like "I should be strong" or "I must keep up the facade" act like invisible chains, keeping energy stagnant, learning interrupted, and potential wasted. Transforming thoughts of failure into symbolic questions opens another perspective. Asking "What does this mistake want to show me?" or "What part of me haven't I recognized yet?" allows experience to become a bridge, not a wall. Pain becomes a map, failure becomes information, and anxiety becomes guidance. And by embracing what was previously denied, freedom emerges, the freedom to feel without identifying with fear, the freedom to move forward without clinging to failure, the freedom to exist fully, even in the face of the uncertainties that life inevitably brings. There are stories that seem common at first glance, but which hide deep layers of transformation. Someone who experienced successive failures, who accumulated defeats and frustrations, discovered that the meaning they sought lay not in immediate success, but in the perception of their own path. The turning point came not from external results, but from internal change, from the ability to see failure as part of the journey and not as a definitive sentence. The hero's journey teaches us that the darkest cave holds the treasure, and that is exactly what these experiences reveal. Each fall, each setback, is a symbolic cavern that protects precious learning. It is not external recognition that transforms, but internal reconciliation, the realization that mistakes carry information about limits, unconscious patterns, and untapped potential. When we contemplate this reality, failure ceases to be an adversary and becomes an ally. It opens invisible doors, expands consciousness, and strengthens resilience. Real stories remind us that life isn't measured by the number of victories, but by the ability to overcome setbacks and emerge with greater clarity, presence, and inner strength. And it is in this space, between failure and understanding, that genuine expansion happens, silent, profound, and transformative. There's a subtle energy that forms when we hold on to the fear of failure. It's not visible, but it manifests itself in tension, hesitation, and constant self-blame. The mind overanalyzes every step, every decision, creating a silent cycle that impedes action. The more one thinks, the more the energy stagnates, keeping the body and mind on constant alert, as if always ready to avoid a danger that often doesn't exist. Guilt also acts like an invisible current. Every imagined failure, every regret, or comparison with others reinforces the frequency of fear, creating blocks that hinder the manifestation of true potential. The "what if I fail" resonates continually, limiting perception and preventing life from flowing naturally. When one looks closely at this dynamic, one realizes that fear is not an enemy, but a guide. It reveals where energy is stuck, where it's necessary to integrate, understand, and release. Transforming the questioning of doubt into conscious reflection, asking "What could this failure teach me?" shifts the frequency, opening space for perception and action. The energy gap ceases to be a prison and becomes a map, indicating where it is possible to grow, expand, and manifest life with presence, awareness, and courage. Eric Newman reminds us that the ego only matures by crossing the dark night, and it is precisely in this space that failure reveals itself as an initiation. Every fall, every mistake, carries with it the potential for expansion, learning, and transformation. It is not an end point, but a portal. It is through these experiences that the individual is invited to integrate their shadow, understand their limitations, and strengthen their essence. The neuroscience of resilience shows that the brain changes in the face of adversity. Each failure creates new connections, new ways of perceiving, reacting, and acting. Failure does not destroy, it rebuilds, shaping stronger, more flexible, and more conscious internal structures. The ability to rise does not depend on the absence of a fall, but on how one responds to it, on the ability to transform stagnant energy into creative movement. Symbolically viewing failure as a bridge and not a wall profoundly changes one's relationship with life. It ceases to be a threat and becomes a path. Each difficult experience is an invitation to cross over, to access deeper layers of perception and awareness. When we understand that failure is part of initiation, that each failure is an opportunity to integrate, grow, and expand our presence, life becomes richer, more intense, and fuller. Fear loses its grip, and awakened potential finds space to manifest, bringing meaning, depth, and authenticity. When we view failure as an integral part of the psychic process, as Carl Jung teaches us, it ceases to be something to fear. The reconciled shadow reveals that every mistake, every fall, carries with it learning, growth, and integration. Failure is not the opposite of success, it is its invisible preparation, the silent ground where inner strength consolidates and consciousness expands. Robert A. Johnson reminds us of the value of the other side. Without experiencing failure, we cannot access depth, meaning, or emotional maturity. It is precisely by going through these experiences that life reveals its richest layers, showing that each difficulty holds within it a key to awakening, integration, and evolution. When we stop fearing failure, something fundamental happens: we stop fearing life. Fear ceases to dictate choices, blocked energy is released, and dormant potential finds space to manifest. Transformation reveals itself silently, profoundly, and inevitably. And it is in that moment, in that recognition, that everything changes. Failure stops being an enemy and becomes an ally, inviting us to a more authentic, conscious, and fulfilling life. If this journey resonated with you, please support this work by liking and subscribing to the channel. This way, you'll help keep this exchange alive and allow more people to access these reflections. Until next time.